With Blue Link Plus, you can access your Hyundai Tucson Limited remotely. Doors unlocked, temperature set, lost car found.
There it is.
Get complimentary class-leading Blue Link Plus. Call 562-314-4603 for complete details.
Oklahoma State survives a scare from Kansas State as the Cowboys are able to escape Manhattan, Kansas with a 20-18 victory over the Wildcats. Iowa State squeaks by Baylor. Oklahoma continues to rise, and Texas, with the help of the Big 12 officiating crew, is able to squeak by West Virginia. Welcome in here to the 10 of 12 podcast. I am your host, Ryan Gilbert. Today here on the show, we'll be recapping everything we had from this past weekend in the Big 12 Conference, as well as previewing next weekend's matchups, as well as getting into some power rankings, kind of explaining where these teams stand. We'll also be kind of diving into the remaining schedules for each of the, I guess you could say, competing teams for a spot in the Big 12 championship game. We'll be talking about all of that here today on the show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 10 of 12 podcast. I'd appreciate that very much. You can stay up to date with everything going on around the Big 12, latest updates, predictions, highlights, scores. It's all there on Twitter at 10 of 12 podcast. But getting right into it here, we've got, I think, the most notable game, without a doubt, is the K-State-Oklahoma State game from Saturday. I know it wasn't the prettiest game for either team. I know Texas-West Virginia was a pretty good matchup, two teams that had winning records going into that game. I think you can make an argument for maybe the TCU Tech game wasn't too bad. Iowa State-Baylor wasn't a bad game either. But we'll start it off here with K-State and Oklahoma State in Manhattan, Kansas. 20-18, the final. Like I mentioned, Oklahoma State surviving a scare from the Wildcats. There's a lot of different avenues we could go with this game. We'll touch on all of them, but I think the first one you got to talk about here is Will Howard, and this is kind of the topic that everyone's kind of talking about Will Howard here and how he is performing. It's been now 4 games since he's really been the main man for Kansas State, and fans are getting frustrated. And I've seen a lot of on Twitter. I've seen a lot of Will Howard needs to go. He needs to transfer. And I obviously don't think that's appropriate to say, but there's people who are getting restless with this quarterback. And if you've listened to the podcast here before, you know that I've been pretty critical of the young man. I've been a little harsh at times, even though I don't necessarily mean to be. I think after this week, though, obviously Will Howard didn't play well. Okay, I think we can all agree on that. To what extent, how bad he played, I think we can argue on that. But Will Howard didn't play well. Okay, if he doesn't have that fumble where that gets returned for a touchdown by Oklahoma State, K-State's going to win this game, right? So he had an interception late in the game at the end that pretty much iced the game, or I guess it did ice the game when K-State had no timeouts left at that time. Howard didn't play well. I don't think anyone really can argue that. He could have played a lot better, but how worse could it have been? I think you can make an argument here for Will Howard that it's not all his fault. And I'm kind of having a change of heart, so to speak, on Mr. Will Howard, simply because this team's not good. Okay, the offense is struggling. You don't have Skylar Thompson, right? You got to remember, Will Howard is not supposed to be starting right now. So if you want to get angry at him, you've got to remember he's a true freshman in one of the best conferences in college football. Being thrown into this situation is not easy at all. So it's not all on Howard, okay? He's got basically no weapons. He's got Deuce Vaughn, who is a weapon, but if you're Mike Gundy, like we saw, if you are Neil Brown last weekend when they played West Virginia, it's not hard to come up with a game plan to stop one weapon that they have in Deuce Vaughn, right? So if you can control him, K-State doesn't really have much going on. They didn't have Briley Moore on Saturday. That's a big loss. I don't think anyone was really talking about that as much as they should. I know Oklahoma State didn't have Tylan Wallace, so that kind of just K-State didn't have Skylar Thompson. Everyone's banged up. We could make that argument all day long, but Howard didn't have any weapons, and he still doesn't. Okay, when you've got to throw the ball, it speaks for itself when DJ Render is playing wide receiver for K-State this season. That's kind of all you need to know, okay? Malik Knowles, banged up. He's not been on the same page as his coaching staff and quarterback, so far this season. You've got Youngblood leaving the program. And not to mention with the wideouts, you've got the offensive line that is really struggling. That doesn't necessarily give Will Howard a ton of time to throw. And there's also people that I've seen on my Twitter timeline calling for a firing of Courtney Messingham. Now, do I agree with that? No. But I do agree that some of his calls have been maybe perhaps a little too conservative, a little too shy, timid, whatever the word you want to use there is. But I agree. I think it's kind of a combination of everything. The play calling from the offensive coordinator, right? Messingham hasn't been the prettiest. I don't think he should be fired by any means, but it hasn't been the best. Okay, it's been a little too soft to try to compete in the Big 12. You've got no wideouts essentially. And not to mention Sammy Wheeler. He left that game with an injury. Who knows how long he'll be out for? So you've got no wideouts. You've got a pretty bad offensive line. And then you've got Will Howard. So it all comes together. It's not necessarily Will Howard's fault because like I said, he's got no weapons. It's not the wide receiver's fault because they've got a true freshman coming in throwing to them. It's not the offensive line's fault because they're young. K-State lost basically all of that offensive line from last year. You can blame Messingham if you want. Sure, I get that. But I am getting a little frustrated here with people, calling for Howard to transfer. I saw a few of those tweets on my timeline. I don't think that's I've been quick to bash him. I've been very quick to say, yeah, Will Howard needs to be a lot better. And he does, okay? I hope that most people can agree that Howard needs to be better, okay? If you want to compete, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're a senior or a freshman, if you want to compete in the Big 12, you've got to be better than Howard has been, okay? Obviously, you've got probably a longer leash if you're a freshman versus, a senior like Skylar Thompson if he was performing like this season. But, overall, it's an 11-man team on the offensive side of the football, okay? It's not just Will Howard and that's it, There's 10 other guys surrounding him, a whole coaching staff. It's not just on Howard. He's doing his best, okay? Obviously, that fumble for the touchdown was just kind of a freak play. And then his pick at the end wasn't well. He had a few good throws. He hit Sammy Wheeler. Yards after catch was big on that one. But, he also had that run, a 69-yard run to set up K-State there. So he played fine, and I know I've been critical of him. He does need to be better. But, again, you got to remind yourself it's not all on Will Howard, okay? We'll step away from Will Howard and talk about this game. And I've already kind of touched on a few of the, big plays in this game. But Oklahoma State, like I mentioned, they survived in Manhattan. They should not have won this game. Kansas State, I don't know if I want to say they were the better team because Oklahoma State obviously won the game. They made those plays to win this game. But I think that a really, really controversial topic that's kind of going around here within the K-State community is Kleiman's play calling to end out the first half, okay? K-State's going down the field. They're in the red zone. Clock's under a minute. I think there was probably 45 seconds left, and K-State's marching down. It's 1st and goal, and they decide to spike the football. I don't know if this was Howard being a freshman. I don't know if Kleiman told him to do this. And again, I don't know if this was Messingham, okay? If this was Messingham telling him to do it, then maybe I'm a little more open to your conversation about the issues he's having at coordinator, but not a good call at all. You have one timeout in your back pocket. So if you score like Kansas State eventually did, you give Oklahoma State 30-plus seconds to go down the field and get a score before half. They didn't do that. Oklahoma State went and kneed the ball, which I don't understand at all. They had timeouts with I just don't get it. I really don't get it. But let's go back here. They spike the ball on 1st down. It's now 2nd and goal, okay? If you want to spike the ball on 3rd and goal and that clock is running down after you've burned your timeout, I am 100% okay with that because time is then an issue. But when there's 40-some seconds left in the first half, okay, and you've got a timeout, and it's 1st and goal, you do not spike that football. You can let literally 20 seconds run off of that clock and be A-okay. You've got a 2nd down play. If you choose to run it, then you call your timeout, okay? If you pass it and it's not complete, clock stops. It just doesn't make any sense. But then when it gets more, I don't know if I should say frustrating, but intriguing, the call for Kleiman after they score that touchdown. So obviously that decision to spike the football didn't matter at all because they ended up scoring. Even though they left Oklahoma State some time on the clock, They didn't do anything with it, but in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. At the time, though, I was livid. I was cursing at my TV. Me and my roommates were watching. I was like, why did they spike the football? That makes zero sense at all. So I'm not trying to bash Kleiman. That is simply the wrong call. I don't know how else to say it. You do not spike the football in that situation. But you go on to the touchdown. They score. You've got the 2-point conversion. And they go for it. Okay, at the time, this score was 12-0. Okay, K-State is up 12-0. Oklahoma State's offense has not put up a single point here late in the first half in the closing seconds, right? So in my mind, you take the points. You go up 13-0. You go into the locker room. You continue to punch at it. You know, you guys are up by 13 points at home, you know, and you've got 30 minutes left of football. Let's go out and pull off the upset. Let's just go to the halftime. Get the point. Not points. Get the point, because obviously it's a singular point here. You get the point. What does K-State do? Chris Kleiman goes for 2, and they don't get it, okay? And I totally understand here that the ball, everything was perfect. The play call, the execution, the effort, everything on that play was perfect. Besides, I guess the execution wasn't perfect. The play was set up well, but the ball was just dropped. So I think it was Brooks. Somebody dropped the ball in the end zone for K-State. I'm blanking here. They should have converted, okay? So it should have been 14-0. And if K-State gets this, hindsight's 2020, right? We're not going to be talking about this at all. If they get it, nobody's going to be talking about it at all. 0. But they didn't. And I know hindsight's 2020, but like I mentioned earlier, 20-18, the final score of that game. So if K-State goes for 2, I guess if they go for 1 in the first half, it's 13-0, okay? You get that touchdown in the fourth quarter, guess what? If you get an extra point, it's a tie game. I mean, you don't go for 2 in the first half. I really, unless you're Oregon, unless you're trying to do something, you know, crazy like that, you just don't leave the points off the board in the first half. You don't, okay? You never know how the score is going to change and flip in the second half, okay? Obviously, if there's a safety or something crazy can happen where that gets knocked off. So you never take the points, in my opinion, okay, in the first half. It doesn't matter what the score is. Even if it's 11-0, 8-7, 6-0, you don't take the points. Pardon me. You don't go for 2 and you take the points. I want to be clear on that, okay? Also, I want to be fair, though. I really do want to be fair, because that's kind of my stance on that. You don't go for 2. You take the points. But I do want to be fair that K-State should have had the 2 points, right? They should have. It was a drop ball in the end zone. And like I said, if they get it, no one says a word about it. I totally get that. So if you want to say that they should have went for it because they got it and they should have got it, you're right. You're not wrong at all. You're right. And I can't argue with you on that. I really can't. But they didn't get it. And it ended up potentially losing them the game. Okay, if K-State, hindsight, like I said, is perfectly 2020. If they convert it, we go to overtime, essentially. Assuming K-State would make an extra point if Blake Lynch cannot get through in the fourth quarter, we're going to go to overtime. Ceteris paribus, everything is the same in this game. It's going to be 20-20, no pun intended. With hindsight being 2020, the score would be 20-20, and we would go to overtime. Okay, K-State, I don't know if they would have won because Oklahoma State clearly had the momentum in this game. They played a lot better in the second half than they did in the first half. But overall, I think there's a few, I don't want to say bad calls. I do. They were bad calls. Okay, to go for it and then to spike the ball as well late in the first half. If you disagree with me, that's fine. That's kind of not why I've formed some strong opinions here over the past couple of weeks. That's not necessarily what this podcast is supposed to be, but at least if you can take away something from this, I want you to think about it. Go back and watch the replay, the highlight, the full game, whatever it may be, and think for yourself, okay? Do I agree with Ryan or do I disagree with him? And if you disagree with me, that's fine. I'm not saying you have to agree with me. I'm just, I'm kind of raising that issue. If you're not a K-State fan, you're listening to this podcast, this is kind of what happened here. This is what people are talking about within, the K-State community. So, that's kind of it for the play calling. Howard is not terrible. He needs to be better. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's becoming a lot more clear here that it's not just on Howard. The offensive line, the wideouts, the play calling, and of course Howard. It's all coming together. So it's not just him. I think I touched on it earlier though, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Tylan Wallace. Okay, this kind of came out of nowhere. An hour or two before kickoff, we learned that Tylan Wallace wasn't going to play in this game, and then of course you've got Brando here at the top of the broadcast. Oh, where's Tylan Wallace? We don't know where he's going to be. We'll check on that for you. We'll get right back. The news has been out for hours, man. Like, I'm getting really restless with some of these commentators here. I know it's unprecedented times, and things are different. I totally get it here, but it's just you've got to do some basic fundamental research and find out that Wallace was not going to play. I mean, even Brando mentioned that Chuba Hubbard go out and play the slot wideout position. I'm like, what the heck? Like, he's the best running back probably in the Big 12. Why would you do that? Why would you split him out wide? I just don't get it. I know Brown played well at the running back position as well for the Cowboys, but overall, I don't even know what the overarching theme of this game is. I think overall speaking, with a broad brush here, Oklahoma State fortunate to get a win here in Manhattan, like I said, okay? K-State, I think you would love to have this game back, and I know there's some coaches don't believe in moral victories, but you should have beat Oklahoma State. You could easily be 5-1 right now in the league if essentially Howard doesn't fumble the ball and have that returned back for a touchdown. They probably would have won if that didn't happen, okay? Probably would have. I mean, they were at least in field goal range at that point, right? So they would have went up. Who knows what would have happened? Seriously, hindsight's 20/20 with all these mistakes. But I think overall, Oklahoma State, I think you've got to kind of start to highlight some of the struggles they're having, okay? The loss to Texas, right? They should have won that game by a lot. But there were just some freak turnovers in that game. So I thought moving forward, they're going to be totally fine. I mean, that wasn't the case here on Saturday. Oklahoma State didn't necessarily give the ball away. I don't even know if they even had a single turnover. Maybe they did. I could be blanking on that. But their offense was just crap. Oklahoma State, especially for the first half, they did nothing to get the ball rolling. Second half, like I said, they were the better team in the second half of that game. K-State dominated the first half. Oklahoma State dominated the second half of that game. That's pretty much the story of that game. It's cliche to say here, but it's a 60-minute game, and once that clock hits zero, that's who wins the game. And if this game were to go on even longer, K-State probably eventually would have went up on the Cowboys, but they didn't. They drop it 20-18, and like I've been mentioning here, 370 total yards for K-State, which isn't amazing. That's pretty average, maybe even mediocre in the Big 12. But Oklahoma State only had 256 total yards. So if you're a K-State fan here, you're looking at that. That is where you've got to be just livid about how you let this one slip away. Obviously, you've got some games coming up. You've got a bye week, which is very important, but then you've got a game against Iowa State, and then you've got two more games, Baylor and Texas. So, the future of Wildcat football is bright. That's the silver lining here. But overall, you would have loved to have this one back. K-State, we're finding out who the real team is. The Big 12's wide open, man. We'll talk about that later on in the show. But K-State's struggling. Oklahoma State's struggling as well. I still like them at number one in my power rankings. Of course, we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. But they've definitely got some issues they need to be fixing out there in Stillwater. Next game we'll talk about here is West Virginia and Texas. 17-13, the Longhorns beat up on the Mountaineers down there in Austin. The 100% biggest storyline from this football game was the officiating crew down there in Austin, okay? If you're a West Virginia fan and you're listening to this, you'll know the frustration. I feel your frustration and pain, okay? Everyone was talking about the fourth and goal play late in the game here for West Virginia. But I think there'd be some remiss if you didn't mention Neil Brown's, I guess you could say, aggressive play calling. He went for a couple of fourth down plays and didn't get them. So he definitely left some points off the board. But I'm not necessarily disagreeing with those calls because you know what? You're on the road. You're playing against Texas. You want to get the win. you're not playing there just to keep close. You're playing to win the game. So that's apart from the point here. The main point here was the 4th and goal here in the final closing minutes of this game. A blatant PI call on Chris Brown of Texas. They don't call it. And that was, everyone's talking about that one on Twitter. Everyone is mentioning that call, but there was a couple other notable ones here. I know West Virginia had a touchdown wiped off the board in the end zone because the pass was ruled incomplete. It was pretty much a 50-50. If they want to call it complete or incomplete, I wouldn't necessarily have too much of an argument be here, but it was call after call after call after call. Texas was getting every single one of them. And if you're a West Virginia fan, you've got definitely a right to be angry about this game. I mean, West Virginia is not a bad football team. I think we're starting to learn that they're going to compete for the remaining 3 or 4 weeks we've got left here, in the Big 12 conference. Texas is overrated again, as always. They're still ranked. It's laughable. They should not have beaten West Virginia. If we're being quite honest here, Daggy had a heck of a day, 317 yards through the air. And much as the story goes here, with Kansas State losing a game they should have won, you've got Texas here winning a game that they probably shouldn't have won either. West Virginia put up a fight, and they have come up just short here in some of these games. You go back to the Oklahoma State game, where they pretty much played better in that game against Oklahoma State, and they lost. It was very even, 360 total yards for the Mountaineers, 363 for Texas. Oklahoma State, West Virginia, 0 for 3 on 4th downs, which is what I was mentioning there. That's the points left off the board. Texas was 0 for 1 as well. But like I said, Jarret Doege, of course, deserves some credit for this one. He had over 300 yards through the air, a couple touchdowns in there as well. So, Doege, I guess he didn't throw for any. But you get the point here. West Virginia, it's very similar to this K-State game. They left points off of the board that they really would just love to have back. I don't have a ton else to say about this game here, other than Texas is still overrated. Even though most people agree they're not good, there's some people out like they're ranked, so it speaks for itself that they're overrated. As for West Virginia, keep your head up. This was a tough loss, but moving forward, I think there is definitely some bright spots for the Mountaineers. Next game we'll talk about here is Baylor and Iowa State, 38-31 as Iowa State squeaks by Baylor. Baylor got off to a strong start for once in this game. They were up 21-10 at halftime, 14-0 after the first quarter, which is not something that Baylor fans are used to seeing. They struggled early on against Texas and TCU, respectively, in their previous 2 games coming into this one. So they came out firing, and I give them a lot of credit. Brock Purdy threw an interception. Another one, he threw a pick six a couple possessions later. So Purdy didn't play well. He didn't play pretty, right? Brocktober's over, this and that, all that. But, overall, Iowa State, I think the same thing kind of goes for Oklahoma State as well. They've got some issues moving forward that they need to get corrected. You go back to last weekend, Iowa State squeaked by Kansas. I know they won that game by 30-some points. I get that, but, it was not as close as that final score would tell you. So Iowa State, like I said, they've got to fix some of these issues. And Baylor, I give them credit. I still think Baylor's down there in the bottom, 3 teams of the Big 12. I don't think there's much disputing that, but they showed some signs of life. They still only have 1 win on the season, and I think even if they played Oklahoma State a couple of weeks back when it got postponed, I think that 1 win number would still be the same. I think we can all agree on that, but they showed signs of life. As for Iowa State, though, you've got to be better than that. You really do. You control your own destiny to play in the title game, but you've got to be better than that than you were on Saturday. I think it's interesting here. This was 38-31, and that score was the same, I think, with about 8 minutes left in this game. So, the scoring was kind of up the whole game, and then 8 minutes left, nobody scored after a Baylor touchdown midway through the fourth. So, overall, the pick six for Purdy isn't pretty. Iowa State continues to struggle. But again, they get a win. But, these games are going to get tougher here. You've got, like I mentioned, Iowa State's got a bye week, but then they've got Kansas State in Ames the following week. So keep an eye out for this Iowa State team. I think they might be on upset alert, and that's not necessarily me being high on Kansas State. It's me being low on Iowa State. I think that this team really might, pull out Matt Campbell here and choke away a win or two down the stretch as these games really do start to matter. They're 5-2 on the season, 5-1 in Big 12 play. But I think this team's going to start to struggle a little bit unless they can get some of those mistakes corrected. Same thing goes, of course, for the Cowboys of Oklahoma State. Last two games here, we'll talk about these ones real quick. There's not much to say about TCU and Tech. 34-18, the final down there in Fort Worth as Texas Christian University beats up on Texas Tech. I don't know really what to say about this game either. I mean, Max Duggan had a heck of a day. He really had the knockout punch there in the fourth quarter with a long touchdown run. It was really just kind of one of those Madden moves where you hit the stick, the joystick. What is that? I don't even know what you call it. You hit the stick and you go backwards, and then it goes whoop, and then he just goes right by him, flies to the end zone. And it was pretty. I mean, Max Duggan had a heck of a day. 19 carries, 154 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground. So Duggan played well, and TCU, it's been a roller coaster of a season. They were 1-3. They had a good first win, but then boom, they're going right back down. And then now they're on the come up. They've got 2 straight wins. They beat Texas Tech, right? TCU, things are looking optimistic here for the Horned Frogs. I don't know how confident you can rely. How confident are you in relying on them moving forward to stay consistent? That is the question here for TCU. I think they can pull out some wins. They're 3-3. They're 500 right now. I'm not saying that they are going to go to the championship game in the Big 12 or anything like that, but if they continue to play well, I like where that team is heading. Max Duggan is still young in his career. I think his health issues early on in the season, he's still trying to catch up with those and learn the playbook. But more importantly, learning not even learning, but just getting in shape athletically with your body. Getting in physical condition and things of that nature. But overall, Texas Tech, I still think Columbia's a good quarterback. But overall, Max Duggan prevailed for a 34-18 win in this game. Last part of this first half of the podcast here, 62-9, the final as Oklahoma beats up on Kansas. Really don't know what to say here at all. I mean, who didn't expect this at all? I mean, they covered the spread by, 12 points because it was like a 38-point spread. So they still covered by double digits, which is pretty impressive. Oklahoma's on the come up. Kansas is still there at number 10 in the Big 12. It's a big drop off even after Baylor and Tech. Those bottom teams. Then you get to Kansas. It's not pretty here. They had a couple positives going. They looked okay versus Iowa State. This and that, but it's right back to square one here after a loss to Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a really good team. This is probably right now. I don't want to say they're the best team. We'll talk about here in the second half, but this is probably, as of right now, the best team in the Big 12. Okay, Iowa State and Oklahoma State only have 1 loss, right? So they've played better throughout the year. But Oklahoma, everything is clicking, for the Sooners at this point in time. Moving forward, we'll see how they can perform. But they've got a fun game coming up in a few weeks. It'll be Bedlam. We'll talk about that in the second half of the show. That pretty much wraps things up here for the first half. Like I said, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, K-State. K-State, the only home team to lose this Saturday in the Big 12 Conference. You got K-State losing to Oklahoma State. You got Baylor losing to Iowa State. You got Kansas losing to Oklahoma. You've got West Virginia losing to Texas. And then you've got Texas Tech losing to TCU. Like I said, K-State, the only home team to drop a loss on Saturday. It was a fun game. We had, all 5 of these games were kind of, I think K-State and Oklahoma State, like I mentioned, was the game of the week. But then you had 4 of the 5, games with a ranked team in it. So it was exciting. I'm kind of sad here. We'll talk about it second half of the show. We've only got 2 games coming up next Saturday. So things are going to, kind of slow down here for the next couple of weeks. And then the following week after that, you've only got 3 games. So we'll have plenty to talk about here, though. On the second half of the show, stay tuned. We'll talk about the power rankings. We'll talk where these teams stand. I'll kind of explain why I have the teams ranked where they are. We'll also briefly preview the upcoming matchups we've got on Saturday in the Big 12, and then we will also kind of get into, like I said, the top half of the league's, route, journey, road to the Big 12 championship game down there in Dallas. So we'll talk about that here on the second half of the show, but first let's take a quick break here on the 10 of 12 podcast.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage, to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's here to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 15% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. And sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Odyssey Podcast, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Odyssey Podcast now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/Odyssey Podcast.
So I'm a father of one. I gotta find a babysitter. I found Care.com and I was blown away. Through the platform, I was able to find local and experienced candidates along with their reviews and rates, which were way more affordable than I anticipated. Care.com really put me at ease knowing that they were all required to go through a background check. If you're like me and you need to find someone reliable for your childcare necessities, check out Care.com. Find the ideal sitters for your childcare needs.
Welcome back in here to the 10 of 12 podcast. I am your host, Ryan Gilbert. Second half of the show coming your way as we talk some Big 12 power rankings. We'll also get into a preview of next weekend's games, as well as kind of looking at these teams and their paths to the Big 12 championship game moving forward with their remaining opponents on their schedules. But before we do that, we'll get into the Big 12 power rankings here, the 10 of 12 top 10, as we like to call them here. Oklahoma State, like I mentioned earlier, okay, they're still going to be up there at number one. I don't know if there's much dispute to this. And I know I said they've had their struggles. They struggled against Kansas State on Saturday. They struggled against, Texas the week before. They struggled against West Virginia early on. Heck, they struggled against Tulsa, in their first game of the season. So this team is far from perfect. But I think if you look at which team can have a higher ceiling moving forward, we're looking at Oklahoma State and Iowa State here, the two one-loss teams. I think that probably Oklahoma State has a higher ceiling than the Cyclones. They've obviously struggled, like I mentioned, but I think that if they get those kind of miscues, corrected, so to speak, right, they've got a really good team. If Tylan Wallace can play, that's a better team, right? If Spencer Sanders gets an off week, which he does now, and then gets, more playbook, gets everything coming together here, I like Oklahoma State up there at the number one spot because they've got a higher ceiling than probably most other teams around the conference besides Oklahoma. And that's a nice segue into number two. I like Oklahoma here above Iowa State. I think Iowa State's, loss, I guess they didn't lose on Saturday, but they almost did, right? So that win on Saturday, I know they won the football game, and I know that they've beaten Oklahoma. I still like the Sooners here at number two. If they're going to play any team in the conference today, I like the Sooners. I don't think they lose to anybody. I think they're going to run the table for the rest of the conference. Can they slip into the championship game? If they do that, then I think it's a yes because that would include a win over Oklahoma State. Oklahoma's playing really good football down there in Norman. I like them at number two. They're on the rise, and they're going to bump back Iowa State a spot to number three, as that's where I've got the Cyclones here at this point in time. It was another struggling performance for the Cyclones. They struggled against Baylor here on Saturday. They struggled against Kansas. the week prior in Lawrence. So I think Iowa State's down there at number 3. It's close to have them at number 2. I'll listen to your argument all day long because they beat Oklahoma head-to-head and have a better record than the Sooners. But overall, I still think Oklahoma's the better team than Iowa State. We're kind of figuring out who these teams are as we kind of evolve into this season. And I think Iowa State's 3, Oklahoma's 2, Oklahoma State's number 1. I mean, I wanted to put Oklahoma at number 1, but, like I said, Oklahoma State's only lost once, and they've got a lot of potential left. I think they can still unleash moving forward in Big 12 play. Number 4, I like Kansas State here. This is unchanged from last week. Like I said earlier in the first half of the show, they would love to have this game back from Saturday. But at the same time, you do have a freshman quarterback in there. He did make the mistakes, right? So as much as I would love to, give them a bump up here to number 3 and pass Iowa State here, I think K-State's still down there at number 4. Really the worst of the best at this point in time. I don't want to compare them to the worst because they're better, way better than the best of the worst would be. But I think right now, there's a pretty significant drop-off between Oklahoma State, and perhaps Iowa State, okay? There's a drop-off, and I know if you watch that game on Saturday, it was close. But at the same time, Oklahoma State matters, a matter of hours before the kickoff, they go without Tylan Wallace. I think Oklahoma State played a better game in the second half, like I mentioned. So K-State's here at number 4. I know you could make an argument to bump them up a little bit, but also if you're maybe a Texas fan, so to speak, you could, make your argument to bring them down to number 5. So I like Texas, like I said, at number 5. They should have lost to West Virginia, like I mentioned in the first half. But, they're pretty much best of the worst of the best, whatever you want to call them. They're Texas. They're overrated. I like them at number 5. Not much else to say about the Longhorns. Number 6, I like West Virginia, and I actually have them jumping TCU in this week's rankings. And this comes maybe as a little bit of a surprise. Texas Tech lost to TCU. West Virginia losing a game to Texas. So a loss shouldn't usually jump you up a spot, especially after the way TCU played on Saturday. It's hard to drop down a spot, but really, if you look at it, West Virginia, they're consistently playing at a high level in the Big 12. Okay, they beat K-State by a couple, 3 or 4 touchdowns, right? And then they should have beat Texas on the road. So I like West Virginia, I really do. I'm sorry if you're a TCU fan. They jumped the Horned Frogs here by a spot, so that brings TCU back down to number 7. Okay, it's really simply because of West Virginia's positive, signs that they've shown me. It's not necessarily that TCU's playing bad, because they're playing fine. It's just West Virginia's really starting to play some good football out there in Morgantown. And guess what? You've got a fun game here coming up on Saturday. We'll talk about it here in just a moment. West Virginia hosting TCU, 11 a.m. on Fox. So it should be a nice battle for, 6th place within the Big 12 Conference. Moving down here, number 8, Texas Tech. I don't know. You've got Baylor at 9 and then KU at 10. I don't know if you can maybe make an argument for one of those teams or another, but those bottom 3 teams are kind of just down there at the bottom in their own little league. I know KU at number 10 is, miles below everyone else, no pun intended, but, you can make an argument for Texas Tech or Baylor being flip-flopped here, but I like the Red Raiders up at number 8 and the Baylor Bears down there at number 9. So those are kind of the power rankings. That's kind of why I have the teams ranked where they are at this point in time. Move back up the line here. KU at number 10, Baylor at number 9, Texas Tech at number 8. I like TCU at number 7, West Virginia at 6, Texas at 5, K-State at 4, Iowa State at 3, Oklahoma at 2, and Oklahoma State at numero uno in this point in time here within the Big 12 Conference. So next thing we'll get into here, we'll talk about sort of this next weekend's games. We've only got 2 games, so this will be pretty brief here. You've got 2 games. Of course, like I mentioned, TCU traveling out east to Morgantown, an 11 a.m. kickoff on Fox. This one should be fun. I genuinely do mean that. I kind of use that as a filler sometimes, or say, oh, this will be a good game. That'll be a good game. But no, this will be a very competitive game. These are 2 teams that are very similar as far as kind of their skill levels go. I know Gary Patterson's had a little bit longer of a tenure than, Neil Brown, a lot longer, but, it'll be a good game. These are 2 very even teams. Like I said, it was hard to, for me to have West Virginia jump TCU because they're playing pretty evenly. but West Virginia's at home. They're only favored by 3 points. I like the Mountaineers here in this football game to cover that spread as well. They're playing at home. Last time we saw them at home, they blew out Kansas State. So they had their struggles. West Virginia barely beat Baylor. They barely were able to beat, KU. I wouldn't say barely, but, they struggled at home. But I think they're really starting to play their best football of the season. This squad is going to be fired up after that game against Texas that they quite honestly should have won. So I like West Virginia here to cover that 3-point spread. And then you've got one of the worst games in the season here, Baylor at Texas Tech, 3 o'clock on FS1. Tech is only favored by 1.5. I like the Red Raiders all day long on that pick. Baylor's, like I said, they've been struggling. They've shown some positive signs here, but I think Texas Tech is the safe option here, only being favored by 1.5. Keep in mind we're recording these on Monday afternoon, so those are subject to change. But Columbia, Brewer, that's what you're looking out for. Not much else to say about that game. There's really not. Will it be entertaining? Maybe, sure. I'll be watching it because there's no other Big 12 games on at the same time. But let's be real. It's Baylor. It's Texas Tech. We'll see what happens. Okay, that kind of wraps things up here for a preview of next week's games. I really don't want to try to make them sound exciting because, let's be honest, they're not. Texas Tech, Baylor, West Virginia, TCU, those are not the most exciting teams in the Big 12. It's still Big 12 football, though. It's league. It's conference play here. Should be. I mean it, though. The West Virginia TCU game will be a good one out there in Morgantown. Last thing that I do kind of want to touch on here and talk about, I think these 5 teams that have a chance to make the Big 12 championship game, okay? It's Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas State, right? And I think it kind of goes in that order based off of how the standings look. Like I said, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas State. But based on how they've been playing, I think you've got to put Oklahoma up there and then probably Oklahoma State, right? But let's go ahead and talk about where these teams stand, okay? We'll get into their schedules here in just a second. But like I mentioned with Oklahoma State, they've been struggling. There's no doubt about that. But they've got, in my mind, they haven't reached their ceiling yet this season, so I'm still optimistic for the Cowboys to make at least a share in that Big 12 championship game, whether it be against Oklahoma or Iowa State, Texas, K-State, who knows. I think Oklahoma State's in a good position. Okay, Iowa State, I don't think they're in that good of a position based off of the way they've been playing the last couple of weeks. Brocktober is over. They've been struggling. I don't necessarily have much confidence in the Cyclones moving forward. Oklahoma, I've mentioned it here a few times. I like them a lot because they're playing some really good football down there in Norman. Texas, they're overrated, but hey, they're 4-2, so we'll give them a chance, sure. We'll see what they can do over their last 3 games, but I don't love their chances. But they're 4-2. We've got to talk about them. It's like the someone who they're not going to do anything, but you've got to talk about them because there is a chance. So they're 4-2. There's a chance, and same thing here. Kind of goes for Kansas State as well. I don't see them doing much moving forward, but they are 4-2, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Wildcats as well, simply because they have a viable path to the championship game. So it should be interesting to see how these teams kind of play out here. We'll talk about Oklahoma State here. They've got a game at Oklahoma, and then you've got a game versus Texas Tech, a game at Baylor. I guess the game at TCU comes before Baylor, so let me go through that one more time here. You've got at Oklahoma, versus Tech, at TCU, and then at Baylor. And that Baylor game should have already happened earlier in the season, but of course it didn't with the COVID cancellations. Baylor's finally gotten that straightened out, surprisingly, but you've got winnable games there, and then you've got games that are specifically that Oklahoma game that I'm a little iffy on if I'm an Oklahoma State fan. So you've got 4 games still left on your schedule. You've got a lot of football left to be played if you are Oklahoma State. As for Iowa State here, you've got K-State in Ames. You've got a road game at Texas, and then you've got a home game against West Virginia. So you've only got 3 games left, and not an easy schedule by any means for Iowa State. It's not the hardest, but you've got 3 teams who are very decent in Kansas State, Texas, and West Virginia. And then you've got Oklahoma here. You've got Bedlam at home against Oklahoma State. You've got a road game at West Virginia. And then you've got a home game against Baylor. That's pretty favorable, I think, if you're Oklahoma. I think they can probably run the table based off of how they've been playing. You've got Texas here at 4-2. They've got a road game at Kansas, and then you've got a home game against Iowa State, and then a road game at Kansas State. And keep in mind, Texas is the only team left here in the top half of the standings that still gets Kansas. So they have they're pretty much the only team here that has one free win on their schedule. I know a Baylor game, or maybe a Tech game, or a TCU game, or a West Virginia game. You're probably thinking, yeah, we'll win this game, but no game is safe in the Big 12 other than that Kansas game. So Texas has at least one win. We can write them down in here at 5-2 because they play Kansas following that bye week on Saturday. So Texas, again, we'll see what happens, but those are not the best games, but they've got a chance here. We'll see what they can do. And then last but not least here, you've got Kansas State, who goes up to Ames. You've got a road game at Iowa State, and then you've got Baylor on the road, and then you've got Texas at Bill Snyder Family Stadium. So that's, again, not a favorable schedule for Kansas State. I'm not optimistic if I'm Chris Kleiman. I'm not optimistic if I am, Texas. I'm not optimistic if I'm even Iowa State, for that matter. So it should be fun. It should be a lot of fun to see where these teams do end up. We've got most cases 3 games left. Oklahoma State, of course, has 4. But it should be a lot of fun here to follow these teams and really, no game is safe here. I would assume that Oklahoma can continue to play well. I would assume Oklahoma State's going to correct those mistakes. As of right now, I'm assuming that Kansas State and Texas are going to continue to struggle, and Iowa State for that matter as well. But you never know. This is the Big 12, and no game is safe here. So, if I had to kind of predict these games here, let's take a look here. We'll start it off with Oklahoma State. Unfortunately, if you're a Cowboy fan, I think you lose that game to Oklahoma just because Oklahoma's playing just so well. But then you've got 3 very winnable games there against Texas Tech, TCU, and Baylor. So I think they win those last 3 games, but I ultimately think that they drop that game against Oklahoma. So I'm going to have Oklahoma State here going 7-2 to finish out conference play. That's assuming they lose to Oklahoma, and then you beat those remaining 3, winnable, pretty winnable games there for Mike Gundy and his Cowboys. Next team here, like I said, Iowa State. They've got K-State, Texas, and West Virginia. I think Iowa State's going to squeak out a win against Kansas State just because that team really is struggling. But other than that, I think, they're going to go on the road and lose a game at Texas. And then they've got West Virginia at home, who Iowa State fans are probably going to be pretty confident in. But I think they're going to drop the last 2 games of the season. I think they're going to end up at 6-3 and lose 2 in a row to end out the season. And then you've got Oklahoma. Of course, I mentioned they're going to beat Oklahoma State. I think they beat West Virginia, and I think they beat Baylor. I think Oklahoma is going to be. Did I say Oklahoma? Oklahoma here. They've got Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and Baylor. I think they go 7-2. They win out the remainder of their games and improve to 7-2 and rattle off 7 wins in a row in the Big 12 Conference. As for Texas, I think, of course, they beat Kansas. Like I said, they beat Iowa State. And then I think Texas beats Kansas State as well. So you've got a 7-2 Texas team as well. And I don't even think Texas is that good. I really don't. But I think that they, like I said, of course they beat Kansas. That Texas game is in Austin against the Iowa State-Texas game. That's in Austin, so I think they can win that one. And everyone talks about the cold game in December in Manhattan. It's tough for the warm weather teams going up there. I still think Texas gets the win here in December against Kansas State, so I think they're going to be 7-2 as well. As for Kansas State, I think they drop games to Iowa State and Texas, like I mentioned here. I think the only game they do win moving forward is against Baylor. So I think Kansas State's probably going to be 5-4 when it's all said and done. So that leaves a little bit of a cluster up here at the top of the Big 12. You've got Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Texas all up at 7-2. So as for right now, we can kiss Iowa State and K-State goodbye. These, of course, are I'm just predicting here. I'm honestly just kind of having fun with this, kind of trying to analyze what's going to happen moving forward. But you would have a logjam there at the top. Now, who would get in? I believe it would be Texas and Oklahoma, actually. So I could be totally wrong here. I'm not the best at this tiebreaker sort of thing, but Oklahoma, if Texas and Oklahoma State and Oklahoma all have the same record, Oklahoma's only losses are to Iowa State and K-State, which essentially don't matter, right? Head-to-head, they beat Oklahoma State and they beat Texas. So they're in. They're 2-0 against, those teams that are tied, right? So Oklahoma's in. Oklahoma State, however, they lose to Texas head-to-head, right, in Stillwater, and then they lose Bedlam against Oklahoma. So that leaves you with Texas, who, against those two teams in the top half, of course they lose to Oklahoma. I guess not the top half. The final three teams, left for me, of course they lose to Oklahoma in the Red River Showdown, but they beat Oklahoma State on the road, and they actually beat out Oklahoma State here and move into the Big 12 championship game, right? So the odds of this actually happening, I think, are next to zero. I don't think Texas is going to have a chance to get in. I really don't. But when I look at it, I think they're going to beat Kansas, right? They're going to beat Iowa State at home. That's what I believe. And I think they're going to knock off a win at Kansas State. I think the Kansas State win is unlikely, right? Most people are going to be saying K-State's a favorite in this game. Texas, the cold weather, going up north. Everyone's going to be saying that, right? And the Vegas odds are going to shift more and more towards Kansas State. I think Texas is somehow going to squeak in here. And I know I've been critical of them here the entire show. But again, don't get me wrong here. I 100 million % in my heart, I don't believe Texas is going to the Big 12 championship game. I don't believe that at all. I really don't. But I just have it all in front of me here. I just picked a game, the results of every game moving forward for these top 5 teams. And in my mind, I think Texas, if they're all correct, which guess what? They're not. Because I'm never right. My picks are always wrong, it seems like. But if these were to happen, and these are what I believe, right? If these happen, it's going to be Oklahoma and Texas. And again, I could be wrong on the tiebreaker thing because I'm not an expert on how that works. But I believe I'm correct that Texas already beat Oklahoma State, so they have the tiebreaker over them. And then, of course, Oklahoma beat Texas and Oklahoma State, according to my prediction, if Bedlam goes the Sooners' way, right? So we'll see what happens here. But I think it's 7-2 for Texas, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, and then 6-3 for Iowa State, and then 5-4 for Kansas State. So of course this is not going to happen. There's no way in hell in God's earth that this is going to happen, right? There's no way, because I'm wrong. But if I had to, like I said, if I had to pick every single one of these games moving forward, all 3 except for Oklahoma State, you got 4 games, right? I think it's Oklahoma and Texas. That's, according to my calculations, it's going to be Oklahoma and Texas, a rematch of the big of the Red River Showdown that we had, the classic, an instant classic, a great game. And quite honestly, the Big 12 would love this. The Big 12 officiating would love this. This brings a lot more attention to a Big 12 championship game. Think about if it's Kansas State, Iowa State. No one wants to watch that, right? So if it's Oklahoma and Texas, I think the Big 12 is going to be very happy. Like I mentioned, I last time here I'll say it, I don't think this is actually going to happen. If I had to predict it right now, I would probably say Oklahoma State are going to be the 2 teams competing in the Big 12 championship game. I think Oklahoma is a lock. Oklahoma is a lock. They're going to make it there. I think Oklahoma State's going to squeak in, but that's going to have you're going to. I think you're going to need to rely on Texas losing some games, because I think Oklahoma State, after losing to Oklahoma, they're going to be able to beat Texas Tech. They're going to be able to beat TCU, and they'll beat Baylor, right? I'm assuming that. if that happens, you still need Texas to lose a game, either Iowa State or Kansas State. And in my mind, I don't think they do. I think Texas somehow wins those games. Of course, I know I'm wrong. I know I'm wrong. I know it. Heck, even Kansas might beat Texas. Who knows? They did it a few years ago. They should have beat them last year on the last-second field goals with the Longhorns needed to beat Kansas. So we'll see what happens here. Pure speculation on my part. Like I mentioned, these are going to be totally wrong. But according to my picks, I think it's going to be Oklahoma State getting knocked out, and then Oklahoma and Texas taking a spot in the Big 12 championship game here. I think Oklahoma, of course, blows them out of the water. But then if they go to the playoffs, they get embarrassed, which they're not going to go. They've got 2 losses. But that's pretty much wraps up the show here. Of course, I'm wrong. I know I am wrong. I don't want to try to say that this is going to happen, because it's not. This is not going to happen. It's not going to be Texas, Oklahoma, which now that I keep saying this, it's probably going to happen. But, these are just based off of my picks moving forward. Please don't quote me on these. Please don't hate me for picking against Kansas State. Obviously it's a home game in December against a warm weather team. I totally get that. But we'll see what happens throughout the rest of the season. Enjoy your bye week unless you are Texas Tech, Baylor, West Virginia, or TCU. And enjoy that off week. Enjoy your time away from the stresses of football. And I look forward to next week, and we'll talk about those games, and then we'll also be previewing another 3 games of football on next week's show. Maybe we'll talk about an upset or 2. We'll find out what happens here, but I appreciate you spending part of your day listening to this episode of the 10 of 12 podcast.
You ready to ride? I thought you'd never ask.
It's the untold story of the greatest American lawman.
I'm warning you, your wicked days are done.
Lawmen, Bass Reeves' new original series, now streaming exclusively on Paramount+.